In today's video, we're looking at 3 games that Magnus Carlsen played in the titled Tuesday from July 4th, 2023, where he went 11-4-11. Now, these 3 games are against Fabiano Caruana, Alexander Bortnik, and finally Hikaru Nakamura. Follow, drop a subscribe, follow me on twitch.tv/bladesong81, join our chess club, and I will see you guys later. Hold the line until then. Peace. All right, welcome back, everybody. We are going to be going over the highlights of 3 games today. The first game that we're going to look at is between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. Magnus Carlsen, as the intro of this video already said, was seeking a historic 11 out of 11 in the titled Tuesday tournament that they had yesterday, July 4th. Happy Independence Day, or belated Independence Day. We're not going to go over the whole thing because I am only a 1000 elo in Rapid, so I will not be able to do it justice, but what I can do is appreciate the key moments of 3 games. Let's get into it. First key moment in this game is the opening. Fabiano opens normally with an e4, but Magnus Carlsen right away goes off the rails and plays a6, plunging the eval bar to a 0.8 advantage for Fabiano. Fabiano does what he needs to do, and he takes control of the center. Magnus still playing games, and Fabiano realizes, okay, time to take the center. And Magnus Carlsen finally plays a normal move, and the next couple moves are more normal. So that's the first very interesting point here is Magnus Carlsen playing a6 after Fabiano plays e4, allowing Fabiano to take the center, and Magnus has to work from behind. And at this point, Fabiano still has that 0.8 advantage that he got from the beginning of the game. Remember where he put the 3 pawns in the center and Magnus started with a6, and then I think he started with c6 as well and gave Fabiano such a great position. Well, Fabiano still has played to the advantage at this point. But that ends now. Fabiano mistakenly puts his knight on e5, attempting to do a knight trade. But what happens next is something that we have to consider when we're at our level or any level. What does your opponent want? Does your opponent want a knight trade? Well, if your opponent wants a knight trade and you want a knight trade, 1 + 1 = 2. But what if your opponent doesn't want a knight trade? And that's exactly what Magnus Carlsen said. He said, thanks for the knight trade, but I don't want it. We'll turn on the feedback for here because this was the one brilliant move of the game done by Magnus Carlsen, done on the 15th move, or 16th move rather, at this point. Why was this a brilliant move? Well, as you can see here, after Fabiano takes the knight, the bishop can come in and take this bishop, and white cannot take this bishop back, because if white takes this bishop back, the queen will take this knight here, and Magnus will be a complete pawn up, which is exactly what Fabiano sees. Fabiano sees that and is like, okay, I can't do that, but what I can do is defend that knight. Magnus pushes his pawn, and at this point Fabiano takes, Magnus takes, and we have a 3 stack of pawns here and an even position. I've never seen this in my life. All right, the next main point of this game is not too far after that brilliant move, but Magnus Carlsen initiated the rook trade, or Fabiano, one or the other, initiated the rook trade. So rooks are off the board, but now this queen has a complete control of this e-file, and now black has a 0.5 advantage over white, which even with 3 stacked pawns, having a 0.4 advantage is huge. The king has 1 spot to move and 1 spot only to keep even some sort of competitiveness in this game, and that is h2. And at this point, it's all about conversion. Magnus Carlsen is the greatest endgame conversion master of all time, and that's exactly what he does. He puts his bishop on the long diagonal and starts infiltrating and moving his king, pushing his king forward. At this point, Fabiano doesn't have anything to do. Watch his king. You just saw his king move once. watch his king from here on out. Magnus is moving his king. Fabiano is shuffling his king. Fabiano is paralyzed here. Fabiano cannot do a thing to stop Magnus Carlsen infiltrating with not only his bishop, not only his queen, but here comes his king. Have you ever seen a more thug king? A thug king just walking through the battlefield, zigzagging through the mines, the bombs, the bullets flying overhead, coming down into the enemy position. That's exactly what Magnus Carlsen is doing with his king. And there's nothing that white can do. White cannot stop this A pawn from promoting. Fabiano tries to give a couple more checks, but it's all for naught. The king will tuck himself into the A file, run, and Magnus will promote that pawn to a second queen, or at the very least, Fabiano will have to sacrifice his queen, and it will be a queen against pawns endgame, and no one, not even myself, could lose that. Alright, the next game we have is Magnus Carlsen playing as white and Alexander Bortnik playing as black. He does a double of fianchetto. He fianchettos both of his bishops, puts his knight out. It's just cool. It's cool to see someone do something that is quite out of the ordinary, but someone who's still so high level to do something like that. All right, the next cool thing that Magnus Carlsen did was not tactically very cool to see, but visually it looked cool. Magnus Carlsen decides to put some pressure on this pawn over here, on this long diagonal here. He moves his rook up out of the way and then proceeds to put his queen on A1. Have you seen a position like this in recent times in your games, in Grandmaster games, in any sort of games? Have you ever seen a queen and a rook on the A files in the 12th move of the game with no pieces having been traded off, being a very closed position? I'm sure somebody has. One of the cool things from this game was Magnus Carlsen playing 4 great moves in a row, which I think 4 great moves in a row should make a brilliant move at some point, but chess.com does not agree. So Magnus Carlsen did 4 great moves in a row, some high level chess. First thing that Magnus Carlsen did was move his rook to D1 to defend the knight that was being attacked. After that, he moves his king to stop the opponent from pinning his pawn, because a pin in this position could be a very detrimental thing for Magnus at this point, because the eval bar is in favor of Magnus right now, but with a pin, it could change the whole outcome of the game. The next great move that he did was allowing the knight to control more squares, get it out of being from under attack from here, allowing it to control more of these squares here. And eventually, it could potentially save him in the long run. And then the final great move that he did was to protect this pawn that was getting attacked here. This is the only good move, and eventually it could potentially win a pawn here. He could win that pawn. So Magnus Carlsen was able to find 4 back-to-back great moves to preserve his lead. All right, and the final piece of this game, the final portion of this game, we are in move number 49, and this move goes to 74. So we are in for a long haul, but Magnus Carlsen's ability to take a drawing position and turn it into a win or a victory is astounding. While not in a drawing position at this point, he's up 1.0. This is a very difficult position to come away with a win with. Usually rooks and pawns and king at the end is usually a draw. So let's see how Magnus Carlsen is able to convert this position. And it's a lot of king moves and slowly pushing the pawn forward, giving checks, avoiding checks, moving the king, giving a couple more checks on his end. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, that was the game. It moved it from a 1.3 to a 2.0 advantage. And Magnus Carlsen, all he has to do now is continue to develop his pawns forward, defend his pawns, give some checks, move his king into position, start shuffling his king around. And this is all the right moves. He's making the best moves. He's trading the pieces when he needs to trade. This was a huge blunder, was trading. It's a huge blunder. This game went from a 1.6 to a 9.9 or a 10 on the eval by trading the rooks. Because as we know, when you trade the rooks and you move your king forward, and you now protect this pawn, the king has only one where to go. He moves his pawn, king goes through, and at this point, Alexander gives a few more moves, but at the end of the day, he resigns because he cannot stop this queen from coming through, checking him, getting in front of the queen, or get in front of this pawn here, and allowing this king to come through, and eventually administering a checkmate. So yeah, Magnus Carlsen was able to do 4 great moves in a row after fianchettoing his bishops at the beginning and stacking up his queen and his rook on the A file, and was able to convert a massively, usually drawn position into a victory. All right, the third game that we're going to be looking at is between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. The actual first interesting point in this game is something that Hikaru didn't do, but rather a mistake that Magnus made. Magnus made a blunder. He made a oopsie. He made a nope in this game. But what he didn't see is that his pieces could get forked. And that's exactly what Hikaru did. Good on Hikaru. Hikaru saw that fork. He saw this queen could take the pawn, and he saw his queen could take this knight. Obviously, Magnus is like, oh crap, don't want that to happen, but it's a little too late. Magnus lost his 1.6 advantage, and now it's tied even. Magnus goes to defend, and Hikaru takes that free pawn. It's at this point that Magnus is up on the eval bar 0.8, and Hikaru decides to give him the game. Hikaru decides to give him the game by doing 2 moves back to back, while on the surface doesn't look like it's going to do anything, but you'll see in a second. He moves his pawn to f3, and then moves his knight to e2, plummeting the eval bar from 0.8 to 4.0. The reason that it plummets to 4.0 is because after black takes, white takes, black gives a check, queen comes back to defend, take, and Magnus would be up a whole entire night. Hikaru realizes that. Hikaru realizes that he can't take, so he moves his knight out of the way, but then proceeds to give up another pawn. Any way you slice it, that move to e2 is losing material. Whether you lose your knight or you lose 2 pawns, the outcome is the same. Hikaru goes on to try to defend, but Magnus at this point puts some pressure on Hikaru, and all Hikaru can do is start to give some checks, move his piece back to block. And at this point, he tries to sacrifice, but it's a little too late. Mate is on the board, and that is how Magnus Carlsen has defeated Hikaru Nakamura.